This is who we are, best friends.
Good morning. How are we? Good? Everyone's got their flannels? We are all ready for fall. One of the more incredible things is when you see like a really old couple at the grocery store or something, and they're just going at their whole own pace of life, you know? It's that shuffle, you know what I'm talking about, the shuffle? They're slowly going through, and everyone just kind of stops what they're doing to watch this couple just be adorable, just existing, right? Just being in the world. And for us, we think that's so incredible because it's so rare. And it's so rare when you find a couple that age who still love each other, who are still kind of bubbling over with love, you know, not annoyed by each other's existence, but just happy to be together, you know, still flirtatious even at that age, still joking with each other even at that age, and it just kind of does something in you. It's because it's so rare. And each of us know that falling in love is relatively easy, but continuing to love someone over a lifetime requires deep commitment. And we acknowledge that and we realize that when we see a couple in that stage of life. Brothers and sisters, there are doors that are only opened with the key that is commitment. There are doors that are only opened with the key that is commitment. The way that you open the door for a lifelong marriage of love is with that key of commitment. I know a lot of people right now who are experiencing deep loneliness. Even though they have friends or family, they feel unknown or isolated. And when you dig down deep into the relationships they have, you find that they feel unknown and isolated because in actuality, they are. They work hard at keeping people at arm's length, never really sharing parts of their life because they are deeply afraid of being hurt. So many people have fear about friendship because they have this worry that they will have the capacity to be wounded again. It's kind of this mentality of, I have no expectations so that I'm never let down. I don't let anybody close so that I'll never be hurt again. And each of us in this room knows the pain of trusting in somebody to be there for us, but when push came to shove, they were nowhere to be found. So we spend our days pushing other people away and often forgetting ourselves how we ought to be good friends. If I could be honest, a lot of my pastoring is reminding people to show up in the lives of the people around them and to be present. To not be so self-focused or self-centered, but to be present in the lives of the people that God has placed around them. And one of the great dangers threatening the life of our community is this inability to commit to people. And we see this in all sorts of different areas of life. And so, for us to reclaim our identity as Jesus people, we must deeply commit to the practice of gathering. For us to reclaim our identity as Jesus people, we must deeply commit to the practice of gathering. Now, before we get into our text, I kind of need to lay before us a theological framework of this that we're doing now, this gathering, why we do this. And it all begins with the reality that we are people of God. Now, one thing I've said here often, but it's important to reiterate, it's this idea. The church is not a place, but a people. Even this morning, you might be saying, let's get ready to go to church, right? But even that framework, though I know what you mean, and though everybody knows what you mean, is unhelpful because the church is not this space. It's not the building that we reside in. It's you all. Look to your left, look to your right, look behind you. That is the church. You're looking at it. It is a people. And this framework that the scripture authors give us is pretty clear that it's not a place, but a people. I wanted to turn your attention to Ephesians chapter 2. Starting in verse 19, it'll be on the screen behind us, and I have some things highlighted for emphasis. Paul says this to the church in Ephesus, "Consequently, you are no longer foreigners and strangers, but fellow citizens with God's people, and also members of his household, built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, with Jesus Christ as the chief cornerstone. In him, the whole building is joined together and rises to become a holy temple in the Lord. And in him, you too are being built together to become a dwelling in which God lives by his Spirit. So notice what Paul is telling the church in Ephesus and telling us. We've made a couple of different moves. When we come to follow Jesus, we make the transition from foreigner to citizen. We are foreigners to God's kingdom and to his rule and his reign. But when we come to follow and apprentice under Jesus, we make the transition from foreigner to citizen. That's why other places in the New Testament calls us citizens of heaven, citizens of God's kingdom. We were once a foreigner, but now we are a citizen. The next thing that he tells us, the transition that we make, is we go from strangers to family. That we have migrated from being strangers to God's people to now integrated into the life, into the family of his household. As we were just all proclaiming, we are children of God. We have been bought and born into a brand new family because of what Jesus has done on our behalf. Paul goes on to say that this is the culmination that has been building in the Scriptures. It is the fulfillment of the Scriptures. That the church, this gathering, this people, is built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, which is a shorthand way of saying the Scriptures as a whole. That this is the culmination, and at that climax point, it is pointing to Jesus, who Paul says here is the chief cornerstone. And this is where Paul begins to kind of shift his thinking a little bit and begins to talk about the reality of the church as a temple. Now, a cornerstone. When you would build in ancient times, you would begin with a cornerstone. And now this stone would be a massive stone on which you would build the rest of the place. It's kind of like your blueprint for how everything's going to go. It would be a straight edge for you to build this way and build that way and build that. And it would kind of be this focal point that everything, the rest of the building would be built around and based upon. And he's saying that is Jesus, the chief cornerstone. And that in Jesus, this family becomes a temple, and this temple becomes the place where God dwells. Now, if you've been here at Zion, you're familiar with this framework, but this is going to be review. And if you haven't been and you haven't heard this, well, welcome. So, the Scriptures are all built around the idea of God's presence, and with this imagery of temple. So when we arrive on the scene in Genesis, the first few chapters, we are to see Eden as a garden, as a temple, as this garden temple for the place where God's presence dwells. Now, I would really probably bore most of you, but there is so much imagery between the tabernacle, the temple, and how Eden is described and the different aspects and things in there. We don't have time to go into that this morning. If you want to geek out with me later, we can talk. But there's all this imagery of Eden being a temple, a place for God's presence and spirit to dwell and reside amongst his people. Right? Then Adam and Eve rebel against God and choose to define good and evil on their own terms. But God does not abandon them. Instead, he designs a new way for them to encounter his presence through the tabernacle, which is a super fancy word for saying portable tent. Right? And it was this tent that the children of Israel kind of constructed, and it made this temporary dwelling place for the presence of God to come and be there. And we follow the story a little bit later, and that tabernacle, that tent, ultimately becomes a stone temple, this actual place built in Jerusalem where the presence of God was. Then we see Jesus arrive on the scene. And in John 1, it tells us that Jesus came to make his tabernacle among us, his dwelling among us. And Jesus is now the embodiment of the presence of God, with the Holy Spirit on him. And as Jesus dies, crucified, and rises from the grave, he then sends his Spirit to dwell in his people now becoming a tabernacle. That each of us are these representations, these small mini temples of God's Spirit. And that is what's come to known as the church. That's why all throughout the New Testament you see, you are God's temple, you are God's temple, your body's God's temple, all this, because we are now the temple in which God's Spirit dwells. And it's looking forward to the day, the final temple, which there is none, in Zion, in the New Jerusalem, where God restores his earth to be his dwelling place. The new heavens and the new earth. You see, from beginning to the end, the scriptures are formulated around God's presence. And so, Paul says that the fulfillment of this is the church. We are a dwelling which God lives by his Spirit. That right here, right now, with each of us gathered, this gathering, we are all filled with God's presence here. And so the big key ideas are this. We are now citizens of a new kingdom, family amongst God's people, and the place of God's presence. Citizens of a new kingdom, family in God's people, a place of God's presence. Now the next big idea I want you to understand about the church is that it's this. The church is made of every tribe, tongue, and nation. You see, this family's borders stretch to every single human being. When God begins his family with Abraham, I want you to notice the promise he makes to him. Genesis 12, he says this, I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you, and I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And notice, and all peoples on the earth will be blessed through you. That even as God begins the family with the idea in mind is that this family would be a blessing to all nations and invite all these people into the family of God. And we see this at the culmination of human history, that every kind of human being belongs to this family. Revelation 7 says this, and after this, I looked, and there before me was a great multitude that no one can count from where? Every nation, tribe, people, and language, standing before the throne and before the Lamb. They were wearing white robes and were holding palm branches in their hands, and they cried out in a loud voice, salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb. We see at the culmination of human history, it's every tribe, tongue, nation, people, language. All these people are gathered together as the church. And so the church is a family. It is a place of the temple. It is made up of every tribe, tongue, and nation. And lastly, the church is a gathered people. Which brings us to our teaching text, where it says this, every day they continue to meet together in the temple courts. What I don't want to have happen is us get super romantic about the early church. I know we've been spending a lot of time there trying to really look at the birthplace of the church and see what rhythms and patterns they have. But if we could be honest, it gets a little romantic thinking about that idea of church. And so all we have to do is read the rest of the New Testament to realize that this church wasn't perfect. Right? We get these few verses to see the things they committed themselves to, but immediately following, you got Paul having to address incest, drunkenness, right? Apostasy, all these different things that are happening in this church. And so what I don't want us to do is get this really romantic vision of community in the church, that it's without problem and issue, and they just all were together and everything was perfect. And I mean, there was drama, okay? There was a lot of things happening, but these were the core practices that built around. It was messy, it was crazy, but God was doing something beautiful. And this is kind of what I want to lay before us. I know over this last several weeks, we've been talking about this vision of the church, and what I don't want us to do is get really romantic about it and then be disillusioned and disappointed when rubber meets the road. Right? As we talk about these things and then you go into your community groups or you're amongst this community, you start to realize like these people are jacked up just like me, right? And it's like, where is this church in the scriptures that we've been reading about? It's here. It's in process. God is doing something here and now. And so I wanted to set that as a framework. And the next thing is I wanted to remind us that when we come to Jesus, it is an invitation into a family. It's a call to be a part of a family. And for us to be a family, it must mean what? We are together. All around the world right now, followers of Jesus are gathering to embody the message that we believe. Right now in our city, There are churches gathered, some at this exact same time, that are family, brothers and sisters, all rallying around this man, Jesus. And we are family. We are family. Had to, sorry. I want to talk about the early church gathering. So, the early church had two primary gatherings. There was the house-to-house gatherings and the temple gatherings. And so they would meet together every single day in homes, and according to this text, every single day at the temple. We have one service on Sundays and community groups throughout the week, right? And so imagine if every single day was service. You are blessed, right? But this community was so enamored by the message of Jesus and so radically devoted to love that they could not imagine spending their days without their family. And so they would gather. They'd gather in homes to break bread, to share meals, to pray for one another, to talk about what's going on. And they would gather in the temple courts to come and to worship. And so we see a smaller gathering in houses and a corporate gathering at the temple. And this is where we get our model for how we do church. We have our community groups, which are these smaller gatherings where people can come together around the bread and the cup. And these larger gatherings where we come to worship together, to be around the scriptures and to be in community. And so they had small gatherings in homes and large gatherings in the temple. Now, this proceeded until the church became horribly persecuted underneath the rule of Rome. Then the gathering switched. So because of their great persecution, the church meetings became secretive meetings. I think of like a speakeasy. You have to go up, knock on the door, know the password. Jesus is Lord. They let you in, right? And I mean, there was no signage. There was no Instagram post. There was none of that. It was you had to be a part of the network of the family to say, hey, we're all meeting at Andrew's house. Let's go. Right? And everyone would kind of go, and it would be, and there wasn't this loud worship with sound speakers and all this stuff. It was singing quietly as to not be heard by the imperial army. Because if they heard you, you'd be dead. Right? And so they'd meet in these caves called catacombs, which are these little underground meeting areas where they'd come all together and worship in a cave. And so if ever you feel a little complaining about our building, a little hot, a little cold, I wish they had more bathrooms, we could be meeting in a cave, right? So let's establish that. But that's how the early church did is they gathered in secret. But it was so important that they risked their lives to be together. They risked their lives to be together. They loved each other so much that they would put their lives on the line just to be with one another. And sometimes we can't even stop hitting snooze on the alarm to be here at this gathering. Or, I'm really tired, community group sounds exhausting, we just won't go. Different frameworks, different postures. Now, we've seen other gatherings throughout church history. My mind comes to something more recent, and that the civil rights movement. So a lot of people think about that movement as a movement that birthed just out of pure political agenda. But that movement was born in the church. Coretta Scott King, Martin Luther King Jr.'s wife, said that the civil rights movement would have no bearings if it wasn't for them gathering in prayer. That our brothers and sisters gathered together to pray and to ask God, how might they see the kingdom of God come on earth as it is in heaven, and how they might achieve that in their day. And that's where they came together and prayed, and God gave them insight on how to do peaceful protesting and sit-ins and the bus protests and all these other things that they did was born out of the community coming together to pray and to seek the Lord. And so the civil rights movement was born out of the church gathering. And so fundamentally, our heritage, brothers and sisters, is that of gathering together. To be Jesus' people means we are people of gathering. Now, I want to talk about us gathering now in the digital age. Technology has brought us some pretty amazing things. DoorDash, Amazon Prime, Netflix, right? All these things, Apple Pay. So random tangent. I've recently been using Apple Pay, and I don't know why I wasn't using that way before. I would like fumble with the wallet, and then you're there with the chip, and the chip malfunction. You're like rubbing it, wiping it on your pants. Come on, let's go. Apple Pay just, and you walk away. Incredible. That's for nothing, just free. Enjoy that. But technology has brought some really incredible things, right? And a lot of really incredible things to work to further the kingdom of God. As I expressed before, right now I have an application on my phone called Logos, which I could pick any text and find the Hebrew or Greek origins, all the different times it's ever used in the scriptures, etc. Right now with an application like Bible Gateway or whatever, you can look up the word gathering and see how many times that's used in the scriptures, where it's used, and even change translations in a moment's notice. Right now, if you had a question about, I wanted to know about further teachings on Acts 2:46, you could just go to YouTube, Act 2:46, and there's thousands of sermons of people all across the world. This is the age of information that we live in. So incredible tools and resources have come from that. But I need to be very clear on something. The church is a physically gathered people. The church is a physically gathered people. There's been a great push for what's been called church online. And hear me in this. You can listen to sermons online, you can sing along to worship online, you can even pray for others online, but you cannot gather online because gathering requires embodied proximity. Gathering requires embodied proximity. What was a theological conviction for us became an unmistakable reality during the pandemic. Church online isn't church. Now, we made those shifts as a church out of safety and health concerns and out of loving our brothers and sisters. But it's important that we understand that watching church on a screen, watching quote-unquote church on a screen isn't church. Because that makes it all about whoever's speaking or whoever's singing and not the body of people that are gathered. And so where one sect of people make the mistake of thinking that church is the building, the other people make the mistake of that church is about just the singing or the teaching. And that's not at all the biblical paradigm of the church. The church is the gathering. If we all showed up and I didn't teach and Jake didn't do worship, this would still be church. Right? But if you just watched my teaching and listened to Jake's worship, that's not church. That's making it about a couple individuals' gifts, not the collective gathering as a whole. And so the church is a people, and you can't be with people online. You can talk with them, you can text with them, you can communicate, even video chat them, but there is something completely different about being gathered, and each of us know this. In 2020, did you have a big moment in your life that just felt not the same because you couldn't be with people? A birthday, a celebration, a graduation, whatever it was, and it just felt weird. And we tried our best with Zoom versions of those, which were just terrible, right? If we're all honest, it's like not the same at all. And so we made those concessions, we made those things out of safety and health and of love for our neighbor. But we have to be clear, we were never under the delusion that that was church. We did that as a way to continue to serve our people during that time, but we were not mistaken that that was church. We knew that it wasn't. And as soon as it was available and safe, we encouraged our people to gather in community groups again, even in just a few people gathered, even with masks on or whatever. We encouraged that because we knew the people needed that. We knew that I needed the gathering. And so I want to be clear. I think there's 4 shifts I believe our church needs to make to really transform into being a people of gathering and for us to be Jesus people who gather. The first shift I think we need to make is this. We need to become a community of commitment. We need to become a community of commitment. Paul says in Romans chapter 12, verse 10, he says, "Be devoted to one another in love." Be devoted to one another in love. This first shift is a reminder that you're not committing to a brand or an idea, but to the people in the room right now, to your right and to your left. To look across the room and realize these are my people. This is my family. Intimacy is only bred in the context of commitment. Intimacy is only bred in the context of commitment. To love somebody means you show up. To love somebody means you show up. Now, again, I want to speak into the reality that is present in our church. Frankly speaking, we are all very sporadic with the gathering. Now, what this talk is not is a church attendance talk, right? You missed the last 3 weeks out of the 5. Where you been? No, we don't care about that, right? That's not what we're here. We're not like your family can't take vacations and enjoy themselves, right? You have to be at church. Or that's insane. You slept in, you don't feel good, whatever. Those things all happen. But a commitment that a follower of Jesus has to make is to the gathering, right? There are things that come up, life stuff happens, and nobody's tracking. I don't have somebody in the back taking roll to see who's here and what's happening. None of that. I always find it funny when I see somebody out and about because they instantly feel this impulse to tell me where they have been, right? I'm just at the grocery store getting a couple things. I see them, hey, how's it going? Oh, hi, Pastor. Sorry we haven't been at church lately. Linda was sick and my cousin broke his toe. And I'm like, hey. I'm just here for milk and eggs, right? I'm not here to see. I wasn't sent here to find you to let you know to come to church. And so it always gets awkward or whatever. And I have been praying, though, and reading, it's like, hey, whoa. It's all good. Just get your yogurt. Let's leave, no big deal. So this is not that I'm saying any of those things. But what I am saying is that church is not something you just check off the list or something you do to make God happy. But it's because of love you show up to be present to the people that you say you love. To love someone means you show up. I remember there was nothing better than playing sports in school and turning around to the stands and seeing your family there. Even as a freshman, when I sat that pine, right? There was no shot I was going in, right? But my parents and my family still showed up. And that meant the world because when you love somebody, you show up for them. And each of us know the pain of counting on somebody and they don't show up. Something happens, heartbreak strikes, and you don't get a text. You don't get a call. They don't ever show up. And a lot of us carry deep pain around that. And honestly, that makes us afraid to commit to anybody else because we've been let down before. But brothers and sisters, to be a part of this community means you show up. You show up to the Sunday gathering to be present to the people here. You show up to your community group, and you show up in the lives of those you love, those you're in proximity with. Because to love means you show up. You're available. Even if nothing eventful happens, even if lightning doesn't strike down, even if it's just a regular Sunday morning, a regular Tuesday night, you show up. Because when you love somebody, that's what you do. The kind of community that each of us long for, a place to be honest, a place to be known, a place to be loved, hear me in this, is only born in the context of commitment. You will only ever feel safe enough to share your heart when you know that they will show up for you when you do. You will only ever feel safe enough to share your heart when you know they will show up for you when you do. It is only knowing that somebody will be there for you that the door of intimacy will be opened. The only way for our community to grow is if we show up for one another. And the last idea on this is for us to be present. We can drag our bodies to do things, right? For those of you who drag your bodies to work out, you know the days when you don't feel like it's not happening, but you drag yourself there to make it happen, right? We can drag ourselves to places. We can drag ourselves to church, right? Barely here, grumpy, tired, exhausted, whatever. What I want to call our community to is not just showing up, but actually showing up and being present. I mean, you're here in the room. You're not checked out. You're not thinking about other things. You're not when everyone else is here. You're here. You're present. You're with people. You're not thinking about where you're going to go for lunch after this, or thinking about the plans you have for the rest of the week, or thinking about the super busy week you have. You are here. For this hour or so that we're together, you're here. You're present with the other people in the room. Because that's what showing up looks like. It's not just physically filling a seat. It's bringing your heart with you too. And being present with the people you say you love. The next shift I think we need to make is to become a community of honor. Paul goes on to say in that same passage, Romans 12, he says, honor one another above yourselves. Now, honor is such a strange thing. It's not really a language we use now. You never just really like, hey, bro, I just want to say I honor you. It's not really language that we use, but it's an important biblical paradigm for us to understand that as followers of Jesus, we're to honor one another. The idea of honor means just to see the person as they actually are, as God has created them to be, and to acknowledge those things. It's I see you for who you are, and I want to acknowledge those things and show honor to those things. And so one of the first shifts we have to make is we have to be people who honor other people's identity. Meaning what? We first and foremost see one another, not as this or that, but as the Imago Dei, people made in the image of God. One of the great things that takes place within us is we drift towards familiarity and commonplace. I live on this side of town, the east side of town. And so to leave the church and go to my house, I drive down the loop, the El Cerro loop, and I'm headed that way, and there's all these beautiful trees going there. And I remember when me and my wife first moved there. I was like, look at all these trees. Like, I love it, so beautiful. Now, on a Monday morning going to work, don't even know that there's trees, don't even know there's people, don't even know there's cars, right? It's that familiarity. I'm not even looking, I'm just going and doing my thing. And relationships get this way. When a couple first comes together, oh my gosh, the way she breathes, right? That's how they talk about each other, right? I just like the way she eats, salmon or whatever. What? It's like these weird things that they're in love with. You get off the phone. No, you get off the phone, right? 20 years into the relationship, what's it like? Did you get the eggs? Did you get the milk? The kid's alive? All right, love you too. Bye. Right? That's how it goes, right? We get familiar with one another. And familiarity sometimes breeds contempt. Something becomes common, it becomes normal, it becomes regular, so you treat it as such. No longer seeing it for the gift and the value and the worth that it's due, but it becomes commonplace. Brothers and sisters, there's no ordinary person in this room. Every single person in this room was made in the image of God. And He has placed His Spirit inside of them, and the potential of kingdom advancement dwells within them. The creativity of God is bursting out the seams in them. And God wants to invite you to discover wonder again by the other people here in this room. There's no such thing as an ordinary person here. Each of us have a story, a way that God's working through us, a gifting, a calling. And our job as followers of Jesus is to honor that by first seeing that. As you get into community groups and, even my community group, as they're getting to kind of know me and stuff more, they see that I have quirks. I have things about me. I can be annoying. I can talk too much, right? I have all these different things. Right? I can be super grumpy. I could be insensitive, right? And so it's easy to kind of just, as you start to see the realness of people come out, to treat them as commonplace. But again, there is no such thing. You're all wonderfully and beautifully made. And we need to acknowledge that in one another. The next thing we must do is honor one another's stories. And by this I mean we acknowledge and see the stories that God is writing in our community, and we honor those. One of the things that to really put this practically is when you see somebody doing something, you see somebody continuing to faithfully follow Jesus, you speak it out loud. You see it, you say it. So if I've seen a young person navigate through the complexity that is trying to figure out their career and their path or whatever it is, and they've remained faithful to Jesus in that process, I want to honor their story by saying, hey, I know how hard that was. I know how stressful that was on you. And I want to say, you've done a great job. The Lord has been with you the entire time. As somebody's been going through a season of pain and heartbreak, it's just acknowledging, I know you're hurting, and I know it's been hard, but I see your faith, brother, or I see your faith, sister. Keep moving forward. It's honoring one another's stories. And that when people share bits of their life, we celebrate or we mourn alongside with them. And just be present to their story. The next thing we want to do is honor one another's calling. So as we see people walking in their gifting and their calling, speak into those realities. I had a wonderful conversation this morning with a sister in our church who's always encouraging me, who's always just reminding me of the things that God is doing in my life. And so I turned around and said, I want to honor you and say, you have the gift of encouragement, and you always bless me. And this is what the Christian community is to look like. When we see each other walking in calling and walking in things that God, we acknowledge those things. The other thing we need to do as a church is we need to honor one another's sacrifices. Look, I know how much it cost you. Look, I know how much it hurt. Look, I know what it took for you to show up here today. You didn't feel like it. You've been wrestling through depression, through anxiety, through loss, but you're here. And I want to honor the sacrifice you made. Look, I know that you show up and you come and you brew the coffee for all of us, right? To be able to enjoy. I just want to honor that you do that. You know, you come early and you practice with the worship team and you lead our body, and we just want to honor that you do that. I know that you're back there with those kids, trying to wrangle them in, trying to not let them hurt themselves, right? And trying to teach them all about Jesus at the same time. We want to honor the sacrifice that you made, because while we were all able to hear and enjoy the message and encourage one another to be present to this room here, you were taking care of our kiddos. We just want to honor you. And that just be natural in the church. That just be kind of something that overflows from us. And the last thing is that we honor one another's future. That we continue to speak life and hope into the story that God is writing in somebody's life and the future that He holds for them. And we just honor those things. We see them and we acknowledge them. The next shift I think we need to make is to become a community of harmony. Paul says this, Ephesians 4. As a prisoner for the Lord, then I urge you to live a life worthy of the calling you've received. How do we do that? Be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. There is one body and one Spirit. Just as you were called to one hope when you were called, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all. So this idea of harmony, when you have a group of people singing together, right? You have the worship team singing, for example. The reason I'm not up here is because I don't have the ability to sing in harmony with them singing, right? There's Jake's voice, there's John's voice, there's Josiah's voice, and there's me, ooh, you know, so like a yodeler in the back, right? And so if you sit up here with me, I apologize, but I have the inability to sing with the other people to where it sounds well. That's this idea of harmony, right? And there's also some music theory behind that. I don't know all of that, but if you want to do some more research, you can. But the idea is that the community of Jesus would be in harmony, that we would be one song sung with different voices, right? And this is what Paul points them to: one faith, one baptism, one Lord, one Spirit. We're one body, and we're singing one song. We're just all bringing our own voices to it. Now, how do we do that? This is the biblical idea of unity. All of you probably disagree on something, right? Whatever it is. We could just start heated debates in an instant here, right? Different political persuasions, different ideological persuasions. There's all sorts of different frameworks and backgrounds and ways of viewing the world that we all don't agree on. We come from different families of origin. We come from different places. We have just different views all the way around. None of us agree on everything, right? We all probably mostly disagree on a lot of things. But we all come together around Jesus. And so the effort that the church has to make, Jesus prays this in John 17, that we would all be one as He and the Father are one. We'd all be one song sung. Not over here singing Shakira and over here singing The Killers and over there singing whatever, right? We are all one song singing to the Lord with our lives. And the way that we do that first, Paul says, is be humble. Now there's a misunderstanding of what humility means. A lot of people think that it means like putting yourself down. And a lot of that looks like, too, is false humility. So when somebody gives you a compliment or something, oh, no, not me, get out of here, right? And that's false humility, because what you're really saying is, tell me more, right? You're like wanting to hear more and more. Oh, bro, you're such a gift. Oh, bro, no, I'm not. Praise the Lord. It's him. It's him, And then there they are. No, bro, you're great. Stop it, dude. It's the Lord. Come on, And what they're trying to do is be faithful to encourage you, and you're making it about yourself. You know what the most humble response you could give when someone gives you a compliment? You ready? Thank you. I received that. Thank you. To be humble enough just to receive something that somebody imparts onto you. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for those words of encouragement. And so, as famously C.S. Lewis says, right, humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's just thinking of yourself less. So it's coming to the room thinking about the other people first. Paul says, honor one another above yourself. It's I come here thinking about the people in the room. Not, I really hope someone talks to me today, but who can I talk to? I really hope someone gives me encouragement today. No, who can I encourage? Humility is thinking of yourself less. The next thing Paul says is be gentle. And this one always gets me when I read it, because I have a tendency to not be as gentle as I'd like to be. But it's this idea of being tender with other people's lives and hearts. I have the disposition to believe that people are wired like me. So when I say something or do something, they're going to interpret it as I meant it, not as it was felt, right? But that's lacking gentleness. Now, gentleness isn't weakness, and I want that to be important. It's not that you let everybody walk all over you and you just do it, and you're gentle, whatever. Gentleness is strength under control, right? It's the ability, you have power, but you withhold it in a spirit of being gentle. Think about holding like a fragile animal in your hands, like a little tiny kitty or something, right? You have the power to, you give it to a toddler. You give it to a toddler, what are they going to do? Be careful, be gentle, right? Because they just want to, and you're going to crush it, right? So you have the power, but you withhold the power. That is gentleness. And in our community, it's so important to be gentle with one another. Because it's easy to grow frustrated. And it's easy to grow frustrated when you've been doing life with people for a long time. Dude, when are you going to stop complaining about that, man? You're killing me, right? Or when is he going to do this? When are you going to change? We could become irritable. We could become another girlfriend, bro. What are you doing, right? We could become that way with each other, but instead we need the posture of gentleness. The next thing we must be patient with one another, long-suffering. I don't know of anyone in this room who does not desire more patience. And if you don't think that you do, you need it the most, right? We all desperately need to be patient with one another. Oftentimes we want people to be at our pace or to be doing things according to our timeline or the way that we would do them. But the way of Jesus is a long journey. And if we're honest, there are things in our lives we should be done with, we should no longer struggle with, right? That we still do. Just resonate with Paul in Romans 7, like, why do I do the things that I do, And everybody in this room feels that way, and so it's important for us to be patient, to believe the best about one another. So when someone comes in grumpy or whatever, it's not, she's so rude all the time, right? It's being patient with one another. I bet you she has something going on. I bet you he's got something on in his world. And being patient with one another. Slow to anger. And I love this idea here, bearing with one another in love. It has this idea of to put up with, to endure. You know what that means? It means that you don't like it, but you're dealing with it. The only way for our community to become a community of harmony is if we learn how to put up with one another. You're going to get on each other's nerves. You get on somebody's nerves. And the only way we can sing in one song, be this harmonious group, be this people of unity, is if we bear one another. If we put up with one another. If we keep moving forward with one another. Because look, genuine community is messy. And it's hard. And it's not easy. And so you're going to need the ability to persevere. To keep moving forward. To keep showing up. Even when you don't feel like it. to keep being there, even though you've been there 1,000 times, to keep on in the community. It requires perseverance. And I love how Paul ends this. Just, it's one family, it's one song. We're all in unity in this. And our lives are this song towards heaven. The next shift we must make is to become a community of love. Jesus says this, "A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another." Check this out. "By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you post on Facebook and let everybody know. If you wear your Jesus People shirt to the grocery store, they will know. No, if by the love that you have for one another, if you love one another, that's how people know." The way the church in Rome made converts was not throwing crusades. It wasn't tracts being handed out. It was the way the believers lived their lives in such a compelling manner, the way they loved one another, that drew people in. Look, I don't know about this dude rising from the dead or whatever, but man, the way you guys love each other, I got to have some of that in my life. And they come and experience and encounter. May that be our witness as a community by the love that we have for one another. Look, this gathering has to be about love. I love what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 13. He's like, man, I could have all the gifting, all the talent in the world, but if I have not love, you know what I am? A clanging cymbal, right? Right? That becomes annoying. It's not in any harmonious song with the community. It's doing its own thing. He says, if I have not love, that's how I am in the community. But if I have love, I join in heaven's song being sung in creation with God's people. We must become a community of love, meaning we actively seek the good of the other. So, I'm going to invite Jacob, and I want to call us to 4 simple commitments we must make to become a people of gathering and to become Jesus people. The first commitment, if you're ready, is to show up. It's to show up. It's hard, I know. You're tired, I know. There's things in life, I know. But the only way this community becomes a strong community is if we're here for one another. And guys, time would fail me to mention all the areas in the scriptures where it talks about this. Hebrews 10 comes to mind. Do not forsake the gathering, right? As someone in the habit of doing, right? There's all this urge, and when you come together. But here's the fundamental reality. You cannot live the way of Jesus alone. You can't. The call to come and follow Jesus is a communal calling. It's coming to follow Jesus together as a family. You can't enact and live out the Sermon on the Mount unless you're with other people. There's just no other way. We're called to do this together. And so I want to ask you to show up. Now, this morning I'm preaching to the choir. You're about to text your friends who didn't show up. Yeah, he was talking about you today. I'm going to ask you to just commit to showing up. Things come up, life happens, I get that. You don't need to tell me when I see you at the grocery store. But what I want you to know is that for us to be a strong community, we have to be willing to show up for one another. And it's not for me so that I see you or just to be and mark this off your list, but it's because you love the people in the room so much, you're going to show up on their behalf. The next commitment we must make is to show honor. I just really want to challenge us that today with the simple idea, if you see something good, say it. If you see someone doing something good, saying something good, just say it, encourage them. Be that voice that shows honor to the other people in the room. This idea of showing honor is, imagine if somebody you looked up to so mightily in your life showed up. You would be like, oh, come here, look, have some coffee, have a seat, look at this, whatever. And, doing all the disclaimer, don't talk to him, he's kind of crazy, whatever. But you'd be showing so much honor to this person. You'd be so excited that they're here. Imagine if we treated each other in that same way. Guys, Jake's here, right? Ashley's here, Nate's here, Cheyenne's here. Can you believe it? They're here. They're really at church, kind of just showing this honor of the story that God is writing in people's lives. The next commitment for us to make is the commitment to stay. You're going to be tempted to dip out. You're going to be tempted to leave. I'm going to say something. Someone's going to do something. Something hard's going to happen. It's a matter of time. If you're still in the honeymoon phase of our church, breathe it in, enjoy it, it's great. But a time is coming soon where disillusionment will fall in. Well, someone's going to let you down. Someone's going to break your heart. Something like that's going to happen. And when that happens, not if, when that happens, the call is to stay. And that's some of the best marriage advice I think you could ever get in your life is just that. It's just stay. When all the enamorment and the honeymoon and all that stuff's over, it's just the ability just to stay. Stay loving, stay faithful, stay present. And it's the same call for our community, just to stay. When things shift, when things change, when things happen, just stay. And lastly, is to serve. Now, this isn't a call to sign up to serve. This is a call to bless the people around you. And if for you that looks like signing up to serve, please do. But my call for you this morning is just to look away to bless the people around you. In small, subtle ways, in ways that no one might even see. But when you walk into this gathering, your mind's not thinking, what can I get, but what can I give? How can I bless? How can I pour out of the things that God has placed inside me to help, to love, and to bless this gathering? To show up, to show honor, to stay, and to serve. We had a sense in pre-gathering prayer, and as we were worshiping, just to close our time today in just some ministry time. And we just want to open that door now. And so a word was given about healing, somebody needing healing, so that whether that's physically, but I really felt that the Lord meant that that was something internal. That someone this morning is carrying a wound on the inside. I think specifically as we were talking about wounds from people who've hurt you in the past, and you just haven't let that go. And it's kept you from community, it's kept you from friendship, it's kept you from entering in here. And if that's really resonating with you right now, if you kind of really feel God stirring that in you right now, I just want to ask you to come up and we just want to pray for you. We just want to bless you. And so if you're like getting kind of sweaty and you're kind of anxious, and you're like, I think that's me, that's probably the Lord speaking to you right now. We just want to ask you to be faithful and obey and respond to that. And the rest of our community, I just want to ask you to stand and we're just going to worship together. We're just going to sing praises to Jesus. But if you feel that you need healing, either physical or emotional inside, and you want to be prayed for, I'm asking you just to come up to the front. Yeah.